All right, I think we can probably let people in as they come in at this point. So good evening, everyone. And before we start, we're letting you know that we are going to be recording this event. And so now we welcome you to Co-opt, a symposium on worker cooperatives as alternatives to traditional workplaces.
So although we're hosting this event virtually, we, the event organizers, are associated with the University of Waterloo, which is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the First Nations of the Grand River, and are within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples.
So we as organizers will start by sharing our land stories, and land stories are a complement or alternative to land acknowledgements, where you introduce yourself to this land and all of its peoples and explain what your journey has been in getting here and connecting with this land. And the idea is that this helps all of us place ourselves in a larger social and historical context.
So we would like to invite all of you to put your land stories and the name of the university that you're coming from in the chat. And if you're not sure which territory you're on, we encourage you to check out the link that I will put in the chat now.
So I'll share my land story while we're waiting for people to share theirs. My name is Niara Van Galen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a third-year architecture student at the University of Waterloo. I'm one of your moderators tonight, and I was born in the Netherlands, and I am of Afro-Surinamese and Dutch descent, and I immigrated to what is now called Canada at the age of 6. I grew up on and now go to university on lands promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River.
My name is Carla Salas, and I am your second moderator and co-host for tonight. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm a third-year architecture student at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture. I am of Venezuelan descent and lived in Caracas, Venezuela, the original land of the Kalinago people, for the first 10 years of my life. I then moved to what is now called Oakville, Canada, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa peoples, and that is where I am currently residing.
And we wanted to thank SWAG and WASA for funding, as well as the Treaty Lands Global Stories team, co-organizers, and our guest speakers for making this event possible. We are hosting this event as part of a long-term goal of redefining our relationship to work. Especially at the University of Waterloo, where we have the co-op program, we are introduced earlier in our education to the professional experience. We will spend much of our waking lives at work, which is not a democratic environment, and there's often a huge inequity between employees of different ranks.
As co-op students, we do not get the protections that full-time permanent workers have, and often workplaces hire co-op students to avoid paying health benefits and other rights afforded to permanent workers. Furthermore, as costs of living go up, many workplaces are not paying a living wage while demanding longer and longer hours of their employees, especially their entry-level workers, i.e. us. The 40-hour work week was also designed so that one person working full-time could support a family and buy a house. That is no longer the case, and many young people are monetizing all of their hobbies, having side hustles, and believing that increasing their productivity is the solution, when in fact it's part of a larger systemic crisis.
We should not be required to sell all of our creative energy, turn ourselves into personal brands, and sell our 20s to corporations so that we can live with dignity. We should be allowed to have boundaries between our work and our personal lives, and we should have time to have hobbies and volunteer and rest. We deserve to have work that allows us to work with amazing people, get paid living wages, work on great projects, and have balanced lives outside of work.
One of the ways that we achieve that is through worker cooperatives. According to the Canadian Worker Coop Federation, worker cooperatives are businesses that allow employees to make decisions, are businesses that are owned democratically and controlled by their members. This democratic setup allows employees to make decisions about what they're working on, how much they get paid, what their hours are, and other critical aspects of their work. We often look to operate based on values that support and forms of social justice work. There's a long history of marginalized and oppressed people, especially BIPOC folks, who have founded worker co-ops so that they can take control of their labor and reimagine their relationship to work, whether that be in STEM, arts, or law. Worker co-ops are just one tool in the struggle for a larger transformation of a society's relationship to work, but they are an important one.
So we will open the event with our guests, Colin MacDougall, Managing Director, and Emily McQuarrie, Director of Finance and Administration from Sustainability Solutions Group, a workers' cooperative which is empowering cities with the very best in climate planning approaches. Emily is an experienced administrator with a passion for democratic leadership and worker empowerment. Before working with SSG, Emily supported artist-led and community-run nonprofits. Emily has been with SSG since 2016. Colin has spent most of his career in and has dedicated most of his passion to the cooperative sector. He was one of the first members of La Siembra Cooperative, creators of Camino Fair Trade and Organic Products. Colin has been with SSG since 2015.
Unfortunately, our second guest speaker, Hannah Tepoorten from Vancouver's Valu Co-op, has had a family emergency and could not join us tonight.
And lastly, we will have Dawn Walker, who is a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on values and social transformation in the design of web decentralization projects. She is one of the original member workers at HYPHA Worker Co-operative, a tech worker co-op that specializes in strategy and design of digital technologies.
As they speak, we invite you to please start thinking about any questions that you may have, since there will be a question period at the end. To start our talk, we would like to welcome Colin MacDougall and Emily McQuarrie from Sustainability Solutions Group.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you so much to Treaty Lands and Global Stories for inviting us to participate in this event. I'm going to share my screen because Colin and I prepared a small slide deck to share with you all. And I'll get Colin to start us off.
Sure thing. Thanks, Emily. And I said this in the chat, but the land stories is it's a really powerful thing to do, and I haven't heard that before. So that was thanks for the opportunity to share that and inviting people to share their own stories. So about a little bit about SSG, just very quickly. So we're a consulting firm, professional services, you would say broadly. Since we started in about 2003, we've done a lot of work in the area of climate and sustainability planning, and that's everything from like green building to college, university, campus sustainability plans. But our focus over the past few years has moved more and more to working with cities and other large institutions to put in place climate action plans, which are very long-term plans that will help cities or even big corporate entities mitigate the effects of climate change or adapt to climate change. A real-world example of this is working with the City of Toronto on their plan to hit net zero carbon by 2050, the Transform TO plan a few years ago. So our work is really data-driven. It couples pretty sophisticated data modeling with field expertise in areas like building science, energy systems, urban development, and even community engagement. So we tend to have a lot of people with technical backgrounds working with us, and no architects, I believe, but different, engineering, data modeling, various sciences. And of course, we are a worker co-op, and it's an interesting story how that got started. So I will pass that back to Emily.
Cool, thanks, Colin. So as Colin mentioned, SSG was founded in the early 2000s, and we were founded by 4 recent university graduates who were looking to work for an organization that reflected the world that they wanted to live in. At the time, the World Social Forum was going on, and the founding members were all involved in the anti-globalization movement. They were attending the WTO protests, the G7 protests, and the World Economic Forum protests. The founders of SSG believed and still believe that another way of doing things was and is possible, and that we could and we still can create a work environment in which workers are empowered and have ownership over their work, rather than an environment in which profits are prioritized. As they started to form their own organization, the founders had an ongoing discussion of the alternatives to working within the free trade capitalist structure. So the idea of forming a company under the worker co-op model was thrown around, and it really stuck with the founders of SSG. For reasons that Colin will get into in a minute, this model seemed to be the best way to embody the founders' values of democratic leadership and workers' rights, and just the fundamental prioritization of people and planet over profit. Rather than building a sustainability consulting firm that would make its founders rich, SSG's founders really wanted to create an organization with a structure that had integrity, an organization that did meaningful work, treated its workers well, and would stand the test of time. The founders felt that incorporating as a workers' cooperative would exemplify how organizations can succeed outside of the confines of a traditional corporate structure. So what we're talking about today. Fast forward 15 years and, Colin and I sort of joined the organization, and then fast forward another 5 or 4 years, and SSG has grown into a co-op of 11 members and 7 workers. So we've grown a lot since the early days. We've expanded our work across Canada, and we've started doing projects in the United States and in Chile as well. And we've even begun merging our operations with another worker-owned business, What If Technologies. So setting up our organizational structure as a workers' cooperative empowered us to get to where we are today. Our workers chose the path that we're on, and our workers continue to shift and reaffirm the path as we go. And I'll hand it back to you, Colin, to go over exactly how our organizational structure works.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with I'm going to call it generic, but this is a slightly more generic worker co-op structure. And by generic, I mean it's kind of how many worker co-ops are organized. And the image itself is actually borrowed from La Siembra Co-op, the makers of Camino Fair Trade Organic Products, where I worked for a while. My partner still works, and it's awesome. So I don't know, shameless plug for Camino. So since it's kind of a circular thing, we can start anywhere, but where I'm going to start is on the right side with the members. So that's most co-ops are founded by a group of members who are looking to start a business, solve a problem, give themselves jobs. So at worker co-ops, most worker co-ops, the members from among themselves will elect a board of directors. Now, sometimes that board might be actually made up of all the members of the co-op, and sometimes, and usually as the co-op grows and grows past a certain level of membership, the board will become a subset. So the membership will elect a board. Now, the board of directors is responsible for a lot of things that a typical board or even a corporate board would be responsible for: approving budgets, approving annual financial statements, and a lot of the legal sort of fiduciary duty stuff that that you could, you could find on any generic board description. One of the primary tasks that the board will do will be to hire and, if necessary, fire the management of the co-op. And by management, that could be an individual if they take a model of having a CEO or an executive director, or it could be like SSG and La Siembra as well, and have sort of a co-executive director, co-managing director model. So that's what takes us to the bottom left side of the drivetrain. And then the management in turn will hire the workers, the staff of the organization, to do stuff what workers do, which is to work at the business and do things, make widgets, deliver professional services, or what have you. And eventually the workers will become members. And now, sometimes there's a membership approval process where the board will approve a new member. Sometimes it's the whole membership will approve it. But basically, the idea is the workers become the members, and then the members elect the board supervises the management, and the cycle continues. So that's sort of as quick as I can give a sort of a high-level overview of how the structure works in generally in worker co-ops. So next, I've sort of done a bit of a deeper dive into, so we do follow that structure, so I'm not going to go into our governance anymore. And don't try, this is an illustrative image here. This is not meant to be something that I will walk through in any detail. But some gory details about what we actually, how we structured our like run our business, manage our business at SSG is, so one, this is a very new structure put in place in part because of the merger that Emily was speaking about. So we have co-managing directors, as I said before. We have broken our work into clusters, and we have a lead of each cluster. So a cluster just sort of is almost like a set of functions that kind of group nicely together. And within each cluster, there's consensus-driven decision-making model. So each cluster has autonomy and authority to make a certain and sometimes wide, far-reaching set of decisions, but there's consensus within each cluster. And when consensus can't be reached, the matter is escalated to what we've dubbed the cluster moot. If anyone watches Game of Thrones, you might know or watched of what a moot is, but it was inspired by Old English. And so the moot is essentially the assembly of the cluster leads. And the key point to illustrate here is that we're flat and we use consensus-driven making, but we don't do that because we're a co-op. We are flat and use consensus-driven making because that is the structure that our members have chosen. And I think the key point of the worker co-op is that the members themselves decide how the governance works, how the organization is set up and structured. So we could very well be just as co-op-y and just as good, effective a worker co-op if we decided to have a really hierarchical structure. And there's actually co-ops that have a CEO with department directors that would maybe look like a traditional corporation. And I would not say they're any less co-op-y. What they are, though, the difference is the members have chosen that structure, and the members are empowered to change that structure if it is no longer working for the membership and the vision and the mission of the co-op. I think that's probably all I'll say about that for now. Maybe more will come up in the questions. So back over to you, Emily.
Cool. Thanks, Colin. So that's kind of an overview of, what we are, how we operate, how we got to where we are. And so I kind of put together some reasons why other people should be co-ops, why other people should start co-ops or join co-ops. And so we're speaking with the School of Architecture. It's professional services similar to what we're doing, which is also a professional service. And so like how you design your organizational structure really matters. How your business is structured has impacts on the longevity and the sustainability of your business. You could be doing amazing work, but if your structure doesn't support its workers, your business could struggle, and it could struggle to thrive or could struggle to survive. So the co-op model, as Colin said, allows members to share in the risk when starting up a business. It allows you to make decisions about how you're structuring it, and it can provide greater job security for people. A co-op structure allows you to draw on the collective skills of your co-op's members. You can collectively support and balance everybody's strengths and weaknesses much more powerfully than you can within a typical corporate structure. There's also the co-op network. So if you're planning to start your own co-op, there are lots of resources out there. There's the Canadian Worker Co-op, as I heard you guys mention at the beginning. There are provincial organizations like the Ontario Cooperative Association. There are co-op specific funding opportunities. And of course, there's the sixth co-op principle, which is cooperating among cooperatives. So if you're interested in starting a co-op, research and reach out to other co-ops that are doing something interesting or something similar to what you want to do. And more often than not, the people at these co-ops would love to chat with you and answer questions that you have about starting your own co-op. And then lastly, this is kind of a joke, but like whenever SSG is hiring workers, we often look for people who are interested in the cooperative model. So if you are planning to apply for a co-op, show that you know what that means and that matters to you in your application. And that can often make the difference. So if you guys if anybody wants to get in touch with us, we have our contact info here. And yeah, again, really thankful to be able to present at this event with you all.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So our second speaker couldn't be with us tonight because of a family emergency. So we will be moving on to welcome Dawn Walker, who is currently a member worker at HYPHA Worker Cooperative.
Hi all, I'm Dawn. I actually dropped, I guess, my land story in the chat, so I probably won't redo that verbally. And I'll just share my screen because I also made a slide deck which felt ambitious, but now I'm glad I did. Okay. I think actually I want to make this, I'll do screen and then share it. Okay, right now full screen. Okay, I hope that you just see a slide. I see some dots. Great. So yeah, my name is Dawn Walker, and I'm a member worker at HYPHA. We're a really young co-op. I've been one of the member workers since the beginning. We just incorporated in 2019. And I kind of assumed that because there's two other people speaking before me that I wouldn't try and spend too much time on co-op structure and leave more for discussion. I think I'm actually a complimentary presentation to the one we just got, so I'm excited about that. So what do? We are a team of 7 with backgrounds in tech, design, and community organizing. We do a mix of strategy and coaching, design, development, and we maintain infrastructure as client work. We have a couple projects that we started ourselves and received grants for, but by and large, we work with other organizations. As I said, we're a 2-year-old tech worker cooperative, and we advise organizations. We focus on building tech skills and capacity. And we do development work to empower friends and neighbors in the Great Lakes region. We have a particular niche set of skills around decentralized web or Web3 technologies. These are technologies that aim to redistribute resources, decision-making, or authority online. I'm not going to spend time on that in this presentation, but if people are curious, I could speak more about it in the question period. So our structure. We are a non-share capital or nonprofit worker co-op incorporated in Ontario. We, as I mentioned, have 7 founding members. We have a single membership type and a 0 membership fee. So there's like a lot of decisions that when you're starting out as a co-op, you'll be prompted when you start to look at the forms. And we all took a long time sort of thinking about that. You know, we spent 3 months socializing the idea. We spent 6 months preparing to incorporate after we had started looking at doing this, and opted for quite a simple form from what we thought we might have started out as. We have a relatively flat structure. We strive for an all board model, which I think Colin hinted at. So I think right now of all the active members, all of us are on the board, but only 4 have like official positions. It's largely ceremonial. Everyone has equal decision-making and governance authority as a member. The board basically like rubber stamps decisions that are approved at an operational level. And also we tend to do a lot of the kind of sort of work of governance collectively by consensus in meetings that happen with all members. We're a member of the CWCF, which affiliates with other co-op associations. And I think a part of why we were excited to be a co-op was about how to participate in this broader cooperative ecosystem. We've been financed entirely by small debt. We did an initial round of member loans. We did a bunch of sweat equity, and then we received 2 support grants by the CWCF when we were getting started. I think this model works for certain types of industries and sectors. We're professional services with low startup costs. We're a remote first organization. There might be analogs to the work that you all do, but I think there also might not be. So just flagging that. We've also come from a background of open source. So we ended up documenting a lot of our processes openly in the form of a handbook and a place with meeting minutes, board resolutions, and more. We created a working open policy together that we use to make decisions on what will be published openly versus privately. I think this is like not exactly what I was asked to speak about, but I thought I would share it because we're young and the struggle is real and the memories are fresh. There have been definitely difficult parts over the last few years. It's been a learning curve. We wrote a post about these. I'll drop the link in the chat after if you want to read about it. But to be short, we chose an obscure version, non-share capital of like a lesser known form co-ops. So there's just been a lot of like almost us having to like train people who we would think would know about this structure, including like Service Ontario. So we are a nonprofit co-op, which is not the same as a non-for-profit organization incorporated under the Not-for-Profit Act. There's like a bit of like kind of how you present that, that I think we've had to learn ourselves how to talk about it. Also, we didn't include some like special relevant provisions in our articles of incorporation to be a non-share capital thing, but like they were approved and then we all found out later that we had made a mistake. So there's just been some of these like learning hurdles and we've like stumbled right into them. We definitely took a DIY approach and none of us are experts. You know, it's cheaper, it just takes time. It's also good if you maybe want to try and like hack a cooperative model to fit your project, but it is a learning curve. I think there's other ways that people maybe who are interested in starting a co-op pursue something like working with a co-op developer. There's some really cool like co-op worker academy programs that are, you know, educational like courses that you can work through with a group as well. But we did none of those things. We just kind of stumbled through it. Why we're a co-op. So, I mean, these reasons sound very similar, but maybe slightly different era of language to what we heard from Emily. So all of our members are in that like middle/older millennial age bracket. And we probably each have a specific answer, but we're dissatisfied with business as usual in tech, in particular, the sector we work in, and wanted to kind of channel the despair that we face when thinking about a looming climate crisis and no future in late stage capitalism. It felt like a tangible hope to try and do something otherwise. So in the words of the crafts, do they owe us a living? Of course they do. But it seems like a good route is not going to be open for us, and we have to build one for each other and ourselves together. Personally, I've been a member of consumer co-ops, a food buying co-op, a grocery, FCL out west, so Federated Cooperatives Limited, and MEC, RIP, and also active in unions and labor spaces. I think I brought that experience with me, so I was already interested and excited in co-ops, and that kind of maybe made me willing to consider that form and like very enthusiastically in the early discussions. The identity of being a worker and seeing yourself as one, to me, is quite powerful. And I think in particular in something like professionalized spaces like tech, which maybe architecture has some similarities here. So that's like a thing where a worker co-op like really leans into that. And I think there's strength to draw there. Advice, I mean, I don't know, like grain of salt, we're like 2 years into this, but also sounds very similar to what Colin and Emily said. You know, I think taking the time to find value alignment was good, and it's like a good thing to maybe be slow at. We had those minimal startup costs, and that worked for us. That vision work is energizing. It's like I think it's important to find things that are exciting in the process and then be excited about it together. I think that's where we've drawn the most of that is, you know, we did this initial retreat. We did a lot of like, what are we going to call ourselves? What, like, how do we care about like our look and feel? And those activities are the ones that end up being really energizing and kind of help doing some of that more boring work. But the boring work is also a critical place to put values into action and follow those co-op principles. I think that part has been like really interesting, and a thing that I'm really excited to deepen my knowledge in is the ways that, you know, thinking about your business plan, thinking about your organizational policies, your governance, even how you write your bylaws, those are powerful tools to kind of set your future self up for success and direct the growth of your organization in the direction you want. Yeah, the last one, I think this is like very explicitly exactly the same thing as Emily mentioned. Principle 6, talk to other co-ops and associations. We would be generous with time and sharing examples. They'll also help you avoid pitfalls. We had many conversations starting up. We received like example bylaws, tons of templates, like just so much support. And everyone always ends the conversation by being like, oh, it's principle 6, no problem. And that's just like kind of like a lovely meme in this space, I think. I didn't put it on the slide, but in terms of finding work at like a tech co-op in particular, there's a couple of tech specific co-op job boards and mailing lists. I'll just drop all these links in chat, and we can also talk more about this in the discussion period, but in particular, a little more US focused, but the New Economy Coalition newsletter posts tons of jobs. So even if you just want to get a feel for like what that solidarity economy space looks like. There's also 3 job boards. There's a slightly more UK one, but mostly also remote and international orgs called CoTech. There's actually just a listing of tech co-ops that is a list, and it just links to them. But I know a lot of them advertise jobs on their own pages like we do. And then there's a mailing list called Tech Co-op. I mean, they all have the same name. This is like not helpful to say out loud. So yeah, I see jobs advertised on these all the time. So definitely if you're looking at starting out, you know, this would be a good place to look if you're looking for a work in at a tech co-op. And then, yeah, there's also a job page, which I think is a little underutilized by the CWCF, so the Canadian Worker Coop Federation, like on their website, but they do post stuff. And we shared a job with them once, and actually I was really surprised to see that there isn't a better, like at a national level co-op job bulletin board, like there should be. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. As I said, like we'd love to hear from you. Those are all the contact things for HYPHA. I'm happy to drop my email and chat as well.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and to all of our speakers. Now that we'll probably open the floor for the question period, please feel free to raise your hand or drop your questions in the chat if you wish. Yeah.
Can I ask a question for the organizers? Oh, I see a question. I'll save mine for later.
Sorry, you can go ahead. I mean,
no, you speak. This is me like being like, I can fill awkward silences. I'm curious.
well, I mean, this is kind of one of the first times I've heard about kind of this type of organization. I was just wondering, I'm assuming that these are kind of more on a smaller scale, or do you know of any kind of larger organizations that are able to apply this, or is this just, I'm assuming this is kind of a newer, it's just being kind of introduced slowly. So I guess it's working well with smaller businesses and cooperatives, but have you heard of or know of larger ones that are able to apply this?
Colin, I feel like you should talk about Mondragon.
Yeah,
that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, also maybe I'll start in Canada and the US and maybe move out to Vancouver. The short answer is this model is applied to companies both big and small. I think you're right to say, I think that a lot of people do see this as a form of, job creation and sort of small entrepreneurship, like co-entrepreneurship, collective entrepreneurship. There are a lot of small co-ops, especially in Canada. But there's in Quebec, within Canada, there's a lot of large, like the forestry sector actually is dominated by cooperatives worker cooperatives, not just any co-op, worker co-ops in Quebec. There's something like, to give you a sense of scope, there's like 350 or 400 co-ops in Canada. There's worker co-ops in Canada. And I think like 2/3 of them are in Quebec. So just where this is why most people outside of Quebec have like not heard much about the worker co-op model. In the US, it's growing, but like, a very few, I'll stop name dropping Camino, I promise, but there is a sort of a sister company to Camino that's the first fair trade coffee company in the US, which is a worker cooperative. I think there are something up to like 200 or 250 members. So again, a lot bigger. And then kind of the, if I can call it this, like the mecca of co-ops in the worker co-op world is Mondragon, which in sort of Basque territory in Spain, it's actually a confederation of worker cooperatives, and they do everything from like banking to industrial equipment manufacturing. And I'm not qualified to go into much detail, but basically it's essentially a cooperative economy. And it started off by, I think, a priest in the 20s. And they said, okay, we really want to start creating jobs. So they said, okay, we want to assemble together and not only create businesses that are cooperatives, but like a federation that kind of groups them and incubates more cooperatives, and they support each other. And so we're talking like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of workers in these cooperatives in the Mondragon Confederation. So to answer your question, really scalable, but in most of our experiences that we will see, the co-ops you'll come across in Canada and even the US, you're probably going to find a lot of small businesses.
Great, thank you. And so I also didn't mention, but they were awesome presentations. Thank you for speaking.
Maybe too, I'll pick up on that thread and add another piece about kind of their age. So, I mean, I think there have been cooperative and collective associations all over the world for a long time. At least in Canada, and definitely like the settler kind of co-op space draws a lot from the Rochdale founders, and they laid out 7 co-op principles in like the 1840s in the UK. So it sort of draws on a long tradition in some ways here, and especially in Canada. I mean, okay, I won't like nerd out too much, but there's like a pretty interesting and intense like radical history. And the early 20th century was like a moment when there was like a lot of cooperatives, and in like agricultural, both like consumers and also like as producers, and ways to collectivize to like protect each other. So for us, it's also been like fun to learn about that history and think about like how to activate it, like in ways that like serves us. I mean, it's also complicated in Canada too, in the sort of settler colonial context, but there's some pretty interesting work and scholars who are like engaging in that. And there's a lot of Indigenous co-ops that are starting that, or have existed for quite a long time, that, are really inspiring to us.
Clearly a very great question, Serena. Thank you.
I guess I have another question. It's about, well, I'm also pretty new to this like co-op system, and I'm still trying to digest like the presentation. So if this is already mentioned before, just let me know. Like I was wondering, is there a reflection system within like typical co-op structure to review our people's like working their best, like efficiency, like how do you decide who gets a promotion? How do you decide like who gets fired? Because it seems like that is how like typically like corporate like structure works. It's like there would be this like CEO of like really charismatic and like a lot of expertise, and then he will like try to bump up all the efficiency and all that. So I was wondering, how does that work in a co-op structure, and like how is it better, I assume?
I guess just as Colin was kind of saying earlier in his presentation, it kind of depends from co-op to co-op. Like there's nothing really in the way that co-ops are structured that says like, this is how people's performance is like evaluated, and this is how we decide who gets promoted or who gets fired. And the whole thing about being a co-op is that the workers are the members, and the members decide like who's that, to go back to that like that thing that Colin showed with the different gears kind of thing, but like the workers decide who's on the board, and the board decides like kind of how that structure works, like who's in management, and then management can decide how that works. And so at SSG, you know, we have the managing directors, and then we have the worker success cluster, and that cluster is made up of a group of people who are kind of, actually some of them are elected by the rest of the organization to be on the cluster, and then they're responsible for sort of making sure like, are people getting what they need to do their best at the organization, or are they not, or are some people not doing their best, or like, do we need to let people go, or do we need to hire people, or hiring is kind of a separate thing, but the success of like each individual person at the organization is sort of managed by that cluster, and then that cluster is elected by the rest of the people there. And so like things are probably different at HYPHA, and like things are different at every different co-op, but it's the co-op structure allows you to decide how that kind of works.
And maybe I'll build as well, just it's funny when you apply democracy to a workplace that there are trends that emerge. And what's interesting is when you actually give the workers power to decide how people are hired and fired, and even what I said before in the presentation, we could in theory have a CEO who we elect to be the enlightened despot of the organization, and they will get to hire and fire. But it's funny that when you actually put democracy in place, that kind of system rarely happens. There are certain exceptions. I know, you will hear stories of worker co-ops that wind up with a bit of sort of tyranny in them. But most of the time, there's some trends that do emerge when you actually empower workers to have a say in these things. Usually, as we do want to performance manage, we do want to be able to, we do want to be able to let people go if it's actually not working out, but we want to do it in a really fair and just way. We want to do it in a transparent way. So again, there's no rules, but when you actually get to, I guess, the point that Dawn and Emily were making before about the federation and talking with other co-ops, when you get a bunch of co-ops in the room, you see a lot of commonalities in the approach. And it usually does involve transparency, fairness, a lot of the 7 co-op principles that Emily showed in her presentation.
Yeah, I can share like our approach to it a little bit too. So we drafted, we think about it a little more, or I don't know, like a phrase that we have used is like, how do we kill the manager inside our head? Because I think if we're all equal member workers, like we got to be in this together. Like, I don't think we want to approach it in a managerial way, which I think is sort of like that norm that gets like inculcated, and kind of what you see everywhere is like the like way to approach it. So we looked around for a lot of resources, and we drafted a good member statement that we all collectively consensused on as like, this is how we want to be accountable to each other. And then we have like a one-on-ones and like as like a feedback. So I mean, the closest analog to like the like a more normal system would be like 360-degree feedback. So we basically do peer feedback sessions, and we have that tied to when we do our like annual members meeting and sort of planning stuff. And that has been the thing that people have been actually everyone likes it and everyone wants more feedback on how they're doing and how to like work better together. And then kind of like that like outerist layer of accountability is in our bylaws. There's just a way to think about handling kind of what become essentially like conflicts, right? Like irresolvable conflicts. And that would be maybe a case where one member is maybe, yeah, no longer able to work along anyone else in the co-op. Thankfully, we have not had to use that. But I think that those first two levels have been working for us a lot to kind of think about those questions of like how we're working together and like figuring out how we each can like, you know, kind of continue that process of like development and learning. And our statement is public, so I'll just drop it here. About being a good member. And we really liked the Seeds for Change org, which kind of creates a lot of resources around like how you think about these things. And there's also another co-op statement that we really liked that we kind of looked at when we wrote one for ourselves. So yeah, there's a lot of really amazing work from like movement orgs and people who have been in co-ops for a long time that we leaned on to kind of start to think about like what our accountability to each other would look like.
Yeah, I'm looking at the handbook right now. It looks like a very long read, but I'll give it a look later.
Yeah, don't read it all unless you want to. It's there if you want to, but in no way.
I guess my question origin from how our school like formed its student association. So I imagine that's kind of like that's some kind of democracy within it, right? Like everyone votes and all that. But a thing that I always see, it's like the people who get elected, well, I'm not going to name drop, but they're often chosen because they're popular or, you know, like people are friends with them, but they're not really chosen because they are good at their work. So even though there are voices, like I would imagine like if there's like a reflection sheet or reflection system within our school, I don't see it really working still, because at the end it's like how do I really make sure that my opinion it's shown in the decision making process. Like I guess it's like a really difficult thing to avoid unless everyone have a mutual like values on how cooperative should work. So I guess that's more on like education. And I don't know if anyone feels the same way as me about like some of the voting process in the school sometime, but it's quite frustrating.
I mean, I can't speak from that in the co-op perspective, but I mean, I'm also a student and at an extremely large institution. And yeah, you know, as also a member of the Graduate Student Union and a fairly large union for teaching work. I think the dynamics in those kind of like large collective, like democratic bodies operate a little different than my experience in a very small co-op. I mean, I'd be curious if at the scale that SSG is at, there's like different ways that they think about these questions. But I would say that one thread I wanted to pick up on from what you said is like maybe how you don't see your individual vote represented in a final outcome. I would say like in the consensus processes that are happening at a small scale with like a tight group of people, I think that there's definitely like moments where you would do what other people call, we use this term too, like disagree and commit. Like there are moments when you're like, yeah, this isn't how I would do it, but like I'll go along for the ride with you all because I have a high degree of trust and we've spent this time like aligning and we know we're on the same page or we're heading in the same direction. But we might not handle this one moment the same way. So maybe I think that there's something that co-ops as a typically, and in our experience, a very small organization offers that's a little different than sort of like a larger governing body. I don't know what it's like in Mondragon, like maybe they face some of the same tensions that you flagged because they are so big and have so many like nested organizations. But for us, it is exactly what you say, like building that value alignment. You know, we like made a list of, we like wrote a mission statement together. We updated every year. We had a long list of values and not everyone agreed with all of them, but our first pass was like, okay, like, are there any on here that anyone is like so uncomfortable with, we like couldn't agree to? And then like we came back at it like 6 months later, and then we made like a tighter about like list of values that we were all like down with. And then the next time we actually like wrote a little definition of each value together. And like, it's really interesting to see how, you know, we had a bit of trust before because we had worked together on volunteer group like projects. It's interesting to see that alignment grow like over a few years together. And I think that those dynamics maybe are a bit different.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I look forward to seeing it grow more and influence more people.
Sure, we have Mayuri ask her question.
Hi, thanks for your presentations. I had a question. I was wondering if most firms kind of start out with this organizational structure in mind, or if any of you know of like evidence of firms that maybe have more traditional or hierarchical models kind of transitioning into worker co-ops. And I was also just wondering how it kind of became a conversation in your organizations.
It's a very good question. I think everyone's trying to be polite, say who it's a, yeah. I'll try to keep a brief answer to give some space to the others who probably have something to say. So yes, there are definitely definitely cases of transitions from non-co-ops to co-ops. And interesting, Emily mentioned before the organization that SSG is in the process of merging with, they actually started off as a family, actually it was a partnership and then basically a family business. And they started working closely with SSG, and they adopted, they didn't change their, I don't want to get into too many deals, they didn't change their incorporation structure, so they're not actually incorporated as a cooperative, but they changed their shareholders agreement to become a democratically, like an employee-owned business. And there is a big push from the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation to see co-ops as a means to deal with retiring baby boomers, we can't even pronounce it, baby boomers, and the potential like loss of companies owing to retiring owners. And so retiring owners saying, okay, why don't we convert this into a worker co-op? I must admit, maybe Don or Emily can help me out, I can't think of any sort of success stories in that regard of note, but I know it exists, I just can't reference any. But again, and I think the Canadian context, the model it's so small. And so outside of Quebec, again, really unknown, and even the supports and like, I'm sure other co-ops, there are hurdles that co-ops do have to jump through when it comes to just having legislative bodies understand what they are. So I would say right now, conversions is not a big thing. And I think part of it is just a matter of education, because the model is very conducive to that type of conversion. So I'll leave it at that. Maybe there'll be more. Yeah, others will have something to say.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's really helpful. I see your comment on, but yeah, that's really interesting. It's kind of nice to know that that's a common thread, because my assumption of it was that it's like something that starts out from the beginning. So.
And I will add on that point, if anyone knows of businesses who are looking to the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation that's been cited a lot, there's funding for this, there's advisory groups for this. So that is actually something that's not only just there in theory, there is support to make it happen from the co-op sector. So it is real and possible.
Sorry, okay, I could say one thing. We've actually spoken to maybe just around a dozen people interested in starting co-ops in the last 18 months. And if people want to have a call with us, we will. And a couple are already incorporated in some way, but they're very small. So it's a very easy conversion, because they're converting from a fairly simple corporate structure into a new one. And I think in some ways they just like wind down the old one and do the new one. I think it can get complicated if it's like an established, large old entity, but I know some people have indicated to us they're interested in it.
Thank you. That's good.
I can also add, I know there was a Guelph architecture firm, I think it's called Arise Architects, and they had transitioned from a regular firm structure to a workers' cooperative. So that might be something to check out. If anybody else has questions, please feel free.
I did have a question just quickly. Dawn, you mentioned in your presentation that this kind of format works better for certain fields. And I guess I was just wondering, what about, I guess in your case, the tech industry or certain industries makes it easier to apply this format to? Or yeah, or just like what are the attributes that you think are kind of useful to have if you're looking into transitioning?
Yeah, and sorry, I might have just misspoke because it's been a long day. But I think what I was trying to get at was that the kind of being able to take some time to get started and kind of go the route we did of not actually have any starting capital and then incorporate it as a non-share capital and a nonprofit, which means like you have limited ways that you can raise equity, like equity and how you can raise money at the beginning is a different pathway. That works well if you don't have a lot of anticipated startup costs. And we had like none. The amount of member loans we started in was like a little over $1,000. Like that's how we started the company. We just did an even split of all the members and said, okay, if you're in, we need to like pay the articles of incorporation fee form. We need to like register some domain names and like get going. But I think that co-op models have like work in every sector, and there's like amazing, like badass examples everywhere. I think in other ones that having access to financing and capital is the issue. But it's like, I think it can be that issue is like less of a hurdle maybe in some of the like professionalized and maybe more like knowledge work and like tech and cultural work sectors. Like, I just think that barrier can be lowered significantly. Depending on like what your initial form looks like. But I actually feel like maybe Colin and Emily have a lot more things to add here. I just have that sort of very narrow perspective.
I think your answer is bang on, Dawn, actually. Like it's really where the model struggles, and you can call it a struggle, you can call it in some ways a good thing, depending on your perspective on capitalism, is that it is not conducive to the sort of angel investor venture capital type of thing where someone says, I'm going to take my, I was going to say $100 million, it's probably not, however many, $1 million, however much money, like hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm going to invest in, 10 firms, 9 of them are going to tank, but one of them is going to make me, one is going to make up for all the rest. And so I'm going to expect a return, an ownership share and a return of, and that sort of, again, a venture capital model, because no one can invest capital and make oodles of dough on that capital. It's not conducive for big investment. So if I wanted to start an electric car company, a worker co-op might not be the best vehicle for that. That was no pun intended. But again, there actually is, for reasons Don was saying, it makes so much, it's very easy to start up. If you're a co-entrepreneurship, very easy to start up, and it's very conducive to working with others to sort of get a business off the ground. And there actually is very good within the sector, very good kind of like startup level funding. There is actually a fair amount of money in Canada. We're somewhat lucky for technical advisory services, startup fees. We're talking in the $5, $10, $30, $60, $100,000. You get beyond that, then it actually starts to become a bit more challenging. So hopefully that complemented what you were saying, Don, but yeah, basically, I totally agree.
Great, thank you for that clarification and response. That helped a lot.
If no one else has a question, I have one. I was wondering, like, I don't know if you could explain like worker co-ops as a bigger solution to some of the problems we talked about at the beginning of our introduction, like just like difficulties being a worker. Basically, as students, we are, we're in the co-op system at Waterloo, and many of us are, struggling with low wages and having difficulty finding affordable places to live. And like, I don't know if worker co-ops are, if you guys see it as a solution to the larger problems of late stage capitalism, or if it's like too much of an individual solution that only works for the few people who are lucky enough to be part of a worker co-op.
Probably one of those questions we could all say something. I'll try again to start to be brief. I actually think if you would speak to co-op historians and probably worker co-op historians, I think most worker co-ops in the world were born out of economic hardship and times when people needed to come together because of lack of jobs. And the most recent example, it's probably more recent, but a recent example is in Argentina after the collapse there. And there's a great movie called The Take by Avi Lewis and Naomi Klein that was put out that basically talks about these factories closing down and then the workers forming co-ops to sort of take them back. So it's interesting, like the kind of maybe Dawn, you'd say your co-op isn't the same, but sort of almost activist-led co-op that is just sort of coming as a means to start a business that's values-driven is probably the exception globally, and the norm is more people losing their jobs or a factory closing down and the workers saying, "What the heck are we going to do about this?" and actually turning to the cooperative model to actually help them out and help prop them up so yeah. So again, I think it's really conducive. I think it's again very conducive to what you're mentioning there.
I can say something now, and I'll just drop this link, which I was trying to find in the, as well, for like a federated network of tech worker co-ops in Argentina. And it's like totally that situation, right? Like coming out of really high unemployment, people with those skills banded together as a way to like address the economic uncertainty they had. I think in the particular context of what I understood, and that was kind of the thing I wanted to hear more about from you all, is sort of where this interest is coming from and kind of the current situation you're facing. Like, I think there are situations where it would probably be hard to like insert a co-op into like an existing exploitative system. Like if it's something where like tied to like achieving part of your education, you have to hit these co-op requirements. Like I feel like there's some thing there where maybe labor organizing is more the answer, like, and I think that unfortunately, or not always, co-ops and like unions or co-ops and the labor movement have not always been tightly knit. They are in some cases, and there's some really cool worker co-ops that are unionized. It's just like layering it on, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, like I would say definitely, I think co-ops can address like issues of affordability and like issues of like precarious labor. I think too, like, not just in the worker form, I think like housing co-ops also came out of that a lot. There's quite a big amount of student housing co-ops around U of T, which is the institution I'm based at. I mean, I don't live in it, but yeah, like I actually don't know though, in a context of like, if you are an individual who has to complete a placement as part of like a conditions of graduating, if I immediately see a way that like forming a worker co-op could replace that need, because I think you would need to, like you need the organization that is in the right area, I assume. I'm showing my ignorance here. So yeah, I feel like there might be a couple different ways to approach it, but it's been so interesting to just discover too that there's more than one like architect firm that maybe is a co-op. And so maybe the strategy is also like getting them involved in your co-op program, or some of that is like starting to kind of like apply that pressure to think about the situation. I don't know. That feels like a bit of a non-answer.
I don't know if Emily wanted to add anything.
I don't think I really have much to add. Like, I think I agree with Don. Like, there are like the system goes beyond just like getting a job. So like it starts earlier on, especially if you're in school, and yeah, if you have to work in these co-ops, like complete a co-op credit or something, it's like harder to work around that. But I think that if you're in a position where you can like after that start or create a co-op, like there's so much opportunity in there to be able to control your own working conditions and control the wages that you're paying yourself and stuff like that, that it does allow you to, at a certain point in the system, get out of it a little bit. So yeah, I think co-ops definitely have a lot of opportunity to provide a solution to what we're seeing in late capitalism.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I think I'll add in something quickly. You were mentioning how, as students, we have to complete this co-op credit. And I think that's actually, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's actually how this symposium sort of sparked, because we saw there's just a lack in our school system where we were given a set of sort of steps to take as a student to graduate, and completing a certain amount of co-op or internships that can be verified through the school and sort of has a checklist of length, payment, like down to the time and down to how much they're paying you for it to qualify as a credit. And I think most of the time what's being offered in our school system are very corporate options. And I think it's interesting to sort of hear that I think we were just interested to know if there are other options and how that can be implemented in the education system, and for more people to know about these options as alternatives.
And we wanted to have people who were not just specifically from architecture to show that like people can have worker co-ops in all kinds of fields. And it's interesting, someone mentioned housing cooperatives, and we've definitely talked about that in school, but worker cooperatives and labor rights is something which we haven't really talked about. And I think these things are tied, especially since we as students are workers very early on, but we're not taught to think about it that way. So I think, yeah, also like talking about student unions, like our student union has a lot of issues, and like the Quebec Student Union is much more powerful than the ones in Ontario. And I think it's just like important for us to start thinking about these issues of labor and organizing and working with other people early on. And so that's why we wanted to hear from some people who have already done that work and made it a part of their career, because like Emily said, we are mostly shown corporate options, and I think it's important to see other ways of existing in the workspace.
Yeah, I will to that say, like, it's really cool that you guys are organizing this event, because I definitely learned about co-ops so late. Like, it felt so late. Like, I went to school and I was studying arts administration, took some business courses, and I was working with nonprofits, and I was working with artists, and I was thinking like, I never heard of a worker co-op. And then I didn't really hear about it until I applied to work with SSG, and it just felt like, oh my goodness, everything that I've been doing, it feels like I should have been working in a worker co-op. And it's incredible to me that nobody ever told me about this. And like the education just really is lacking in a lot of ways. And it's really wild that we don't, especially like, and Colin, you went to business school. Like, I don't know when you learned about co-ops or if you had to teach yourself, but it just feels like there are so many venues that we should be hearing about co-ops that we're just not. So it's really cool that you guys are talking about it.
Yeah, and I'm I'm really hesitant, Emily, of whether I should share some share some of the inner conversations that happen at SSG, but I open my mouth, so I'm going to. When it comes to internships, we've had this debate internally about internship program. And on one hand, you're like, okay, it'll be really useful, I think really good if you can offer mentorship to someone, show them what our work is about co-op model. On the other hand, it's like, we're a small business administratively, it's really, really hard to sort of to set these things up. But here's what I will say though. If there was like a body, a student body from a school who was like, we want to set up a co-op program with co-ops in our field, that would be just such almost a no-brainer. And I know we're not an architect firm, and we're a very small firm, so we could probably accommodate a couple interns, co-op students per year. But I like to the point about cooperating with co-ops, and that there are architecture co-ops, like the one that you mentioned before, but then some internationally. I would, if you haven't done this, actually, this just sort of screams of like partnership between the school and a series of architecture co-ops, even internationally, if that's allowed, to set something like that up. And I think that if you just quote that 6th principle of cooperation among cooperatives, you'll have them, eating out of the palm of your hand. But seriously, it feels, and I'm not sure, but it feels like there could be, there's some power to what you folks are talking about and doing.
Yeah, or I wonder if even I wonder if that's something that like CWCF could facilitate, or, I wonder if there's some partnership there too, where it's like, we want to do placements, but we want to do placements with co-ops, and people would love to do that.
Yeah. I'll say a little bit like wearing my co-op hat, but I could say more wearing being a student hat. So we were part of the Canada Summer Jobs this last year, and we said the only way we could do it is if we could pay a living wage, because we are extremely uncomfortable with how internships work, and co-ops and internships are also like happen in tech. I would say that they tend to be paid. I'm actually, my background is not, like, my undergrad was not in tech, it's in philosophy and history. So I'm not the right person from that, but there's engineers in our co-op, and they speak of that, what that experience was like. And so I think for us, it was like, we had a pretty clear commitment around, we don't feel comfortable asking people to do unpaid work. Like, that just is like a line we can't cross. And I mean, I would actually say, and I think this probably is true of other co-ops, the issue is more like bandwidth to mentor young people, because it's a lot, and it's a big responsibility, and we were all like very concerned if we could take on and bring and provide a good space for that student for the period of time, so they got what they needed out of it, and like it set them up for future success. So I think figuring out a way that it's not single co-ops doing it alone totally feels like a way that you could get more people on board in some way. And then kind of thinking as a student, I mean, yeah, unfortunately, I think often the administrations are gonna not do enough, and it's gonna take like repeated advocacy and organizing work from students who push back and kind of get work for the conditions they want. I mean, in our own context, we've done a lot of kind of like work to get our faculty to do what they should have been able to do already. But sometimes it's also about like finding strategically the people in staff maybe who are on your side, who can like do that wedge. I know in our context, there was like a career officer, but they're actually super willing to like use their title and like letterhead or affiliation to like reach out to orgs if like we wanted to try, like if someone wanted individually to try and get an internship with them. So it's like, I think there's like ways you find these like paths in, and like people who maybe can help like push that along, but it's like, I think it takes a lot of work, and it's unfortunately the people who shouldn't be putting the work in who have to like make these changes. Yeah, I mean, also like probably not stuff I want to say on a recording, but I'm super happy to talk strategy about like some like organizing stuff and maybe be more frank about like kind of the context that we've had to do it as like even just organizing as students separate from our union and separate from the student union, like in our department. But I think it might be like, there might be ways that you could achieve change at like just the departmental level, and then also think about those other levels that like, you know, can help push it forward. But sometimes these are like long battles, and I think I'm assuming it's a short program. So this is like, you're kind of doing the work for like people who are entering next year sort of thing, you know? But also just echoing, like super inspiring to hear. And it's really exciting to like hear that this is the context which you all came to like thinking about alternative forms.
Thank you all so much. That was really great. I think if anyone else has questions, they know where to reach you guys. And obviously now we know we can easily reach out to other worker co-ops as well. So that's really great to know. Yeah, I think if anyone, unless anyone has objections, I think we can wrap up for the night. Yeah, I think the last thing we wanted to say is that like we have been reimagining our relationship to work and also with equity work. So like in terms of organizing, last year we held the Breaking Foundations conference to talk about race and equity work that we have been doing at the different architecture schools in Canada. And with some of the other attendees, we co-wrote a manifesto to reimagine what architecture might look like as a profession if it was no longer rooted in capitalism. So we can share the link to that in our chat if I can find it. Here we go.
While Nira does that, we're also encouraging students from other faculties to write their own manifesto and to think about what your field might look like if it was no longer tied to ever increasing profits from shareholders. What if the priority was the well-being of your local community and the workers themselves? This can only be realized if we begin imagining and working towards that.
So next term, as a result of some of this previous work, we're hoping to hold a follow-up event, and we might try and get some speakers more specific to our field. But we hope in the meantime that students who have attended, I know there were a few people from other faculties, that they can look at how they can make these kinds of changes and apply this sort of worker co-op mindset to their own faculties. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you
So
guys.
much. Thank you to the
Thank you all.
organizers
Thank you
for
all.
putting this
Thank you.
together.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everyone.